702.
The Clement Manyathela Show.
Let's walk the talk.
All right, 25 minutes now before 11 o'clock. We now continue with our series looking at South African wars. This is something we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, where we take a moment for a bit of a history lesson. We have already looked at the first Boer War. That's how we started this series, with that first installment, looking at the first Boer War. And then we discussed the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. And then we spoke about the Second Anglo-Boer War. We looked at the Khoisan Dutch Wars. And today, I want us to take some time to discuss the Sekhukhune Wars. These were a series of conflicts that were fought between the Bapedi nation under King Sekhukhune. And there was the encroaching forces of the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, or the ZAR, or Transvaal Republic, and the British Empire back in the 1870s. And these wars were so critical. They were part of the Bapedi's resistance to European colonialism. So I want us to take some time to understand what these wars were about, what was the strategy, and what role did Kgoshi Sekhukhune play in those conflicts, in those wars. So our guest this morning, who's going to guide us through the conversation and take some of our questions, is Nthebe Molope, who is the author of King Mzilikazi Kamashobani. You're welcome to call us on 011-883-0702 if you've got questions, or maybe you've read a lot about the Sekhukhune Wars. Something has piqued your interest and you want to share it with us. You can send your WhatsApps as well on 072-702-1702. Nthebe, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Nthebe. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Thank you. Let's start with understanding who King Sekhukhune was, Sekhukhune the First, and what made his leadership so significant at that time.
I think one of the first things we need to do when we look at our royalties is that we must appreciate the fact that the rise to being kings was not straightforward. As you would see with Sekhukhune, for example, that there was contestation in terms of who must actually be in power. So Sekhukhune was the son of Sekwati and the grandson of Tulare. And the two people that he actually was a descendant of were also known to be formidable warriors in their own right. In fact, Tulare was said to have been in their praise singings. They say that he used to walk with an iron stick, referring to a gun. And they would say, Tulare would say tu, 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 which is a sound of actually almost onomatopic to how a gun actually is used. So yeah, that was Sekhukhune. That is the environment in which he actually had grown up, with his father having been one of the first people who was put up a resistance against the Dutch, the Boers, in 1838.
Okay, so. And thank you so much for that context, because it does matter. It's clear that he ruled during intense colonial encroachment. How was he able to maintain his kingdom and prevent the invasion from the Boers?
What was important is that he. Like us, talking back around this whole issue of contestation.
Nthebe, I think we've lost you there.
Already been seeing that he had the potential.
Oh, sorry, Nthebe, something happened there. Your line got cut off there. If you can just start from the beginning, please. We didn't hear the beginning part.
Okay, I was saying that the notion of this Edom and the people who are rightful inheritors of power comes in there. In that, and I want to just very quickly look at the other people who became great leaders in their own right.
Sure.
Who also were not necessarily the ones who were earmarked to be the ones who were supposed to take over power. You look at Ilembe, Ushaga, says the same thing. You look at Mzilikazi, also same thing. You look at Sekhukhune, same thing. You look at the person that Sekhukhune, or rather Mampuru ultimately got refugee from, Unyabela, of the Ndebeles. They also had, their kingdom had actually been split because of the same thing of contestation of power. So that is where he actually came from. But the whole issue is that Sekhukhune was certain that they must make up a fort that must resist the intrusion of the Boers. Because when the Boers, what we must also remember about the Boers, long before they had the Anglo-Boer War, they had a fallout with the British in the Cape. And then they decided that they must move very far away from where the British were going to be. And when they were moving towards Natal, what was then Natal, they found that the British were already there. And therefore, they decided to go further up. And that's where they actually interacted and fought with Mzilikazi in 1838. So the Dutch actually had to lick their wounds twice. In 1838, they were defeated, pushed back by Sekwati, their father to Sekhukhune, and then later on they were had a pushback by Mzilikazi at Fescop in 1838. So yeah, that is the background basically around his rise to power.
What were some of the causes of tension between the Bapedi Kingdom and the Boers prior to the wars?
In my view, one of the things that the Boers had seen was that the Nguni groupings were not pushovers. Remember, there was a long, drawn-out battle that was fought in the eastern part of the Cape, coming from Cape Town itself and then pushing right up to going up to Natal. So there was a lot of resistance, and ironically, the British and the Boers came together to fight against the Khoi, the Xhosa, during all that drawn-out wars. And then when they got to Natal, they found that there was a lot of formidable fighters that pushed back against them. Now, my take is that they thought that amongst the Sotho Tswana people, that's where things will be much easier. They can be able to basically push them around. And that's where they were in for a big surprise. Because one of the first things they were not aware of is that from the times of Tulare, remember I said Tulare had a gun. Tulare, already because of his proximity of his capital to Mozambique, he had already been trading with the Portuguese, with the ivory and a number of other things, carrosses and so on, and getting guns from the Portuguese. And now we must put this in context of the 1852 Sand River Convention. Now, the Sand River Convention was signed between the British and the Boers. But some of the things that they were agreeing on was that one of the major things is that there must not be any guns in the hands of Africans. And now the problem that they had was that there were two people who had already started getting guns for themselves. One of them was Langali Balele. And Langali Balele was saying that he was keeping these guns as souvenirs, something that he was just going to keep. And then on Sekhukhune side, he actually, after the diamonds were discovered in 1869, he sent Bapedi to go and work in the mines in Kimberley. And then some of the money that they were paying to him as a way of thanking him for getting them employment, he took that money and he was busy buying guns from the Portuguese. Now, the reason the Portuguese were agreeing to do something like that, to get the guns over, and also remember that even a person like Dingizwayo, one of the guns that he got, although he got it from Cohen, But there was also already an access that they could be able to get guns from the Portuguese. So the Portuguese saw themselves as not being a part of this whole notion of the British and the Boers. And if they could be able to help to push them back, they would. And that's why they were making guns available. And so he had a quite an arsenal of guns that he also then got his people to train in terms of using those guns. And that's why they found him to be so difficult to overcome, because unlike where they got into other Sotho-Tswana areas, they found that there were no guns. In fact, at a much later stage, Botswana only got guns through Livingstone, who was already in Botswana, and gave them, and that's how they were able to push back against Paul Kruger. So yeah, he became a hard nut to crack in that. He knew how to fight, and then also he had the guns, which for a long time was only in the hands of either the Boers, the British, or the Griquas.
Ah, that's fascinating. It's going up to 13 minutes now before 11 o'clock. We're in conversation with Nthebe Molope, who is the author of King Mzilikazi Kamashobane. What questions do you have around the Sekhukhune Wars? Have you read about the wars? Have you watched a documentary even about Kgoshi Sekhukhune? What questions do you have? And what's piqued your interest? What do you want to share with us? Give us a call or send us a WhatsApp voice note.
You're with Clement Manyathela.
702.
11 minutes before 11 o'clock. We're having a conversation this morning about the Sekhukhune Wars, the series of conflicts fought between the Bapedi nation under King Sekhukhune I and the encroaching forces of the Transvaal Republic, so to speak, and the British Empire in the late 1870s. And our guest, Nthebe Molope, has taken through just the history and the context around King Sekhukhune I and how his leadership was significant at the time and how he was able to rise to power, especially considering that he was considered an illegitimate heir to Mapuru as the legitimate heir. I'm taking your calls though on 011-883-0702. Your WhatsApp's on 072-702-1702 if you want to join this conversation. Let's start with Pat, who's calling us from Sandton. Pat, good morning.
Lochan, Clement.
Hi, Lochan.
Sure. Just have a question around the names of the kings, right? He mentioned Tulari and Sekwati. And if you're from KwaNdebele, you know this, that when young men come from the mountains, they get given those names. Sekwati, no Tulari. So I just want to understand what the link is between the Ndebele people and Bapedi. You know, because also, like, for example, when they praise themselves, you know, they use the Sepedi language. I just want to understand what happened, or what is the influence that the Bapedi people had over Ndebeles.
Well, thank you for that question, Nthebe. In fact, my uncle's name is Tulare, so I get your point very well. Nthebe?
Yes, interesting question. In fact, one of the things that we have to be take cognizance of as African people is how our different cultures have over time been brushing off and influencing the other cultures. For example, in Tshate, if you go to Tshate today, they will tell you that there were two groups of people, of tribes or of nations that had influenced Bapedi, Marota. It is Bakatla and then Ndebeles. Bakatla, because the Bapedi will tell you that they are an offshoot of Bakatla. Because when Bakatla broke off, one of the groups of Bakatla was Bakatla ba Makau. And those Bakatla ba Makau are the ones from whom Bapedi then broke off. And from the time that they had broken off, actually they had even been having a totem, a Kabo as a totem. And which is quite interesting that if you go amongst Bapedi, the name Kabo is still very prominent amongst them. Now, it was only after that, when they had now started settling, that they then took up a Nuku, a porcupine, to be their totem. But then the first Ndebeles, long before Mzilikazi came through, who influenced Bapedi, were the Ndebeles who were those that are coming out of the Ndebeles of Mfana, of Ndebele himself, and so on, who had actually come from the area of what is now referred to as Ladysmith, Mnambit. So they came down, and the first people that they interacted with was Bapedi. That is why if you look at the Pedi language, there's a lot of words that have got Ndebele influence, like Kochata, like Matolo, and there's many other words, even Oshabelela. When I was growing up, we used to use a Sepedi hymn book. Mm-hmm. And that's where I would see a lot of words that these words did not really sound Pedi, but they have actually been incorporated into the Pedi language. So, yes, there is that level of influence. So by the time Mr. came and shook off Sekwati's children, they had long been made some sort of a collaboration and working together with Amandebele, and that's why there's that cultural mix.
Mm-hmm. So the first Sekhukhune War resulted in a major Boer defeat at Thaba Masera. What contributed to their military strength, their strategy as well, just the strategy of the Bapedi kingdom? And I'm also wanting to understand, because before 1877, Britain had a somewhat sympathetic view of Sekhukhune's independence. So what really changed after the British annexation of the Transvaal?
Okay, first around the Boers. What is interesting around that war, which was then put up by a man who was known as Beggars, and who also then put up a fort there next to Sekhukhune's royal place, and which was then got to be known as Beggars Fort. Now, when Beggars, who had been the president of Transvaal, decided to go and pick up a fight against Sekhukhune, because for them, for the Boers, by and large, they had, and they were looking at African children as being apprentices, which is basically a very sophisticated or a nice way of calling a slave, because they were taking young children and they were getting them to be working for no pay and under very odious conditions. Now, when they wanted to go and take over that part of the land, the interesting thing is that Kruger warned Beggars, and he said, don't go and fight against those people, because he first warned them against picking up a fight against the Zulus. And so when he was being warned against Bapedi, he thought that no, but he will that will be just a Sunday walk. And so when they got against Bapedi, that's where they were pleasantly surprised. They found that they were well armed, they had a fort, and they had a strategy of being right at the hilltop, rolling stones where necessary, and then belching guns and so on. And so Beggars got so embarrassed to a point that after his defeat there, when he came back into the Transvaal, that's how Kruger got to be a president. So, I mean, to an extent, Kruger can thank Bapedi for having made his rise to power easier by virtue of the fact that his predecessor fell on his sword.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. What role did the Swazi allies play, just quickly before we wrap up, the Swazi allies in the eventual British victory?
They were, this is what is also interesting amongst both the British and the Boers, in that they would fight a war, but they will have the majority of people who are actually fighting there on their behalf being not themselves, but being other people. I mean, we had seen this when the Boers went to attack Mzilikazi at Musecha, that they had the majority of people who were there fighting were the Griquas. And then they also supplemented with Barolong. Now, in the same instance here with the British, because you see, this British had also this whole mentality of being higher than anybody else, and because they had seen that they had been able to push around the Boers and which had already succumbed, and they thought that they will then also have an easy way. They first started the soft way by making peace with Bapedi in 1877, and then later then started to say they must pay tax in the form of cattle, thousands of cattle that they required. And Sekhukhune was not going to have that. And so he put up a fight against them. And so in that way, they realized that the people who knew the terrain well were the Swatis, who were not very far from there. And so they got them in numbers, and they had them to go and fight there. And one of the other things which we must also not forget is that there was Merensky, the missionary. And Merensky was also used tactically by these guys, because he came there to come as a person who was bringing the word of God, but at the same time, he was actually giving intelligence, because he had also, like many of the other missionaries, I'm busy going through some book by Luca Janchi, who talks about how the missionaries actually divided Batlaping in the area where ultimately the British took up the diamond, in an area which then later got to be called Kimberley and so on. It was the same thing that they did. They divided the royal family. Some people decided to convert, others decided not to convert. Those are the converted, would then be taken to schools, got clinics, and so on. But then they will get some sort of support in case of enemy attacking. And so Merensky did the same thing. And what Merensky did is he took one of Sekhukhune's wives and converted her. You can imagine, how, what amount of emotions will then rise when you are now splitting a family like that. And so that's how Sekhukhune and them decided to attack Botshabelo. That they cannot just look at it as an ordinary place. It's actually some sort of a covert support for the Boers and the British.
Yeah, sure. Nthebe Molope, thank you so much for speaking to us. So insightful. What you're sharing with us about the Sekhukhune Wars. He's the author of King Mzilikazi Kamashobani. Go get yourself some books that tell these stories. As you know, we're unable to get through everything. Ultimately Sekhukhune got captured, in the caves, and you can read more about what happened afterward. The involvement of his half brother Mampuru and why he had to act in the manner that he did. There's so much history. And this is a little bit of our part through this series to just introduce some elements that may be of interest to you.